everyone is. I'm Natalia, as Mr. Praveen mentioned. I'm a senior associate at Azevedo, a law firm in Brazil, which also has offices in the US and Tokyo. I have been working in Pinheiro Neto for the past 11 years in environmental law, and I have a master's degree in the same area, while also having had the opportunity to work for 1 year in the Japanese law firm of Nishimura and Asahi in Tokyo. And with this background, having an environmental law background and living and having the opportunity to work and live in Japan, one of the things that was very striking to me was the waste management system in the country. And when you come from a very large country, as Brazil is, and you go into a country with restrictions in land use, as is the case of Japan, and you have an experience and background in waste management, policy, consulting, and litigation, as it has been one of my focus areas of practice, something that you wonder is where does it all go to? So how does it what happens, right, to the waste that is produced by such a populated country with such limited land use and land use restriction. So this is the first time when I started wondering about whether there were Japanese lessons that could be applied to, that could become Brazilian possibilities in the field. And so just for starters, I mean, we had already several presentations that were on this related topic, but just to make a very brief presentation on the scope here, what we're talking about when we're talking about waste to energy. We're talking in essence, in very simple terms, from different methods for the treatment of waste with the goal of using it as a source of of energy, either directly through combustion or using it as a means for production of fuel. So we're talking about either incineration for power generation and for general supply to the public, or we're talking about specific production of fuel for industrial source. And there's also the possibility of biomass waste electricity recovery from the decomposition of electric waste and the use of the gas produced. So talking about what is waste to energy, we also need to address why waste to energy. So why do we look at it from an environmental perspective? Why do we go to it as an alternative? And we do so because it addresses three main aspects of environmental concern. It simultaneously addresses waste management issues, so both as to volume of waste and how to deal with the volume of waste produced. And when you have a world that is growing in population and growing in the amount of waste that is produced per person per day, you have to, it's very easy to see that you have to address what to do with that volume of waste in some way that can not just be its disposal in a site and just living in there on a site without any treatment. And also, when looking at this alternative to landfilling the waste, you have to see that there's a comparison also in emissions that come from the gases and greenhouse gases related to both processes. So you, in comparison to landfills, you'll see waste to energy as also a more beneficial waste management technique and technology, because it at least has a 50% efficiency improvement with regards to methane capture, for instance. And that leads to the other 2 points that are energy. Why is it an interesting energy generation and climate change alternative as well? Because you have what is considered a clean source of energy when done properly and through advanced available techniques. You have something that does not cause does not use the fuel-based sources for its production of waste. It does not use non-renewable sources. It does not add additional resources or additional provisions for the production of waste. So you have based on something that was discarded that is already in the end of the line if you were talking about a linear economy. So you are also inserting it in a circular economy model that is treating what was discarded and inserting it back into the productive cycle. And that is directly related to climate change, because when you have that providing better emissions than regular waste management as is landfill, and when you have that producing energy through a clean source, so producing it without heavy emissions of greenhouse gases to the environment, you do that by addressing policies of climate change as well for the country. So this why is waste to energy in general, but why waste to energy in Brazil? So we have a country here producing over 1 kilograms of waste per person per day in a total of 79 million tons of urban waste generated per year. And what is a more staggering number is that we have 40.5% of that being improperly disposed of in open dumps or similar locations with no sanitary or environmental treatment whatsoever. So that is already in itself an issue, a problem that we will need to be addressing in some point. But it also relates and has another side, that is the potential of the country for waste to energy applications. So it does have a potential of supplying 3% of the national energy consumption through this method. But that goes also to the question of, is Brazil open to waste to energy, or if it is, how open it is. And we need for that to address and to analyze the national regulatory setting here to see what scenario does it bring us now currently, what setting do we have in terms of incentives, in terms of regulation in the country. And I apologize in advance because I won't be able to go into extensive details on each of the regulations mentioned here because of the time that we have available, but I will try to have a focus here more on public policy setting, on public policy goals that are being established in this scenario in the country to give an indication of where we are now in the terms of assessing this technology and integrating it into our system on regulation. So a starting point here for the more general provisions is looking to the national policy on solid waste in Brazil. This is a policy that was enacted in 2010, so it's fairly recent. It's not a much older law when you compare it, particularly to the basis of comparison that we have here, for instance, in Japan, that we have initial laws dating back to 1995. This is something that is a little bit more recent. And although discussions on it started in the early 2000s, so we had at least a decade there of discussions for the enactment of the law, we've only had it enacted for 10 years as of now. And the policy established in 2010 already has in itself as one of the goals to foment the energy recovery of waste. And it does so with the caveat that it should be, that fomenting should be done and should be performed so long as technical and environmental viability are proven and emissions from this process are controlled and duly controlled under the national regulations for emissions standards. And it's very interesting because one of the first controversies that we have on the topic when discussing it here in Brazil is that an indication that a national policy would actually defavor the use of waste to energy by placing it last in its list of priorities for waste disposal and waste management after consumption. And this is a point where the terminology of the policy is very important to address this actually misconception, because the policy does not treat waste disposal as a term that is in the same sense as we use it in common language. So it differentiates from environmentally adequate waste disposal methods and from environmentally adequate waste destinations, from the terms used, the translation of terms used in Portuguese in the law. And environmentally proper waste disposal are landfills. Landfills, the environmentally proper or environmentally adequate part being the sanitary or environmentally treated and safe landfills, but disposal, essentially the term disposal refers to landfilling the waste, as opposed to the possibilities that final destination of waste brings, and that's where you have the priorities established. So you have the possibilities in number one, that should be the first priority, reuse of waste, second, recycling, third, composting, and fourth, energy recovery. So although in the priorities for the environmentally adequate, environmentally proper destination of waste, you have energy recovery being in the last seat, you still have it as a more favorable alternative than landfills. And that is naturally related to the concerns that we had before of land use and the occupation of land for landfilling, and also the comparison in emissions that it generates. That is a direct consequence of having the technical background in the issue. One instrument of the national policy that is also very interesting to be analyzed in the setting that we're talking about here is the National Plan on Solid Waste. So the policy is more regulatory, more establishing principles of the legal setting in Brazil, so both through federal law and federal decree, but it establishes the need for the federal government to provide a national plan on solid waste that is more public policy oriented, so more towards goals and focus of the public policy in Brazil. And we have currently a draft for that under public consultation. It's been under public consultation since the end of July and will be so by mid-November this year. So we don't have a final version of that plan yet, but we have this draft that already brings and shows us how the country is seeing and looking at, and what does it intend for the next 20 years in the setting of waste to energy and waste management. And the plan sets for goals up to 2040. That's why I refer to the next 20 years. And particularly to waste to energy, we have in objective and numeric numbers, we have goals of reaching 63.4% of biogas generated that can be turned into energy. That is one of the first goals related to the topic. We have the additional goal that 4% of the national waste mass in landfills be turned into energy by biogas generated through its decomposition. And we have the goal that 994 megawatts of the country's energy be provided through thermal treatment of waste in particular. So that already says that it is something that is a focus of the national policy at this time when looking at waste management and energy generation as well. And then more particularly in short term, I'm talking about the next 20 years, but talking about the next 4 years, it is interesting to see that it addresses concerns that are exactly the topic of what we're talking about here. So it puts forward in quoting from the text that we need to identify technologies up to 2024, that we need to identify the technologies with viability for the different realities of the country, and also the potential of recognizing success cases. So it's basically that we need by 2024 to be doing our homework and identifying what works and seeing how it applies here in Brazil in the best way possible, following the guidelines that we already have. For that, within the same context we had last year, and you'll see that a lot of this regulation or this focus has been happening since last year, this Interministries Ordinance number 274, which although it has very particular provisions determining minimum temperature that is to be reached by thermal recovery plants, and you have a focus on contingency and emergency plans that need to be provided, and continuous monitoring that needs to be done and required from the plants, as well as the environmental licensing regulation in general. What it's being seen as most important is exactly in showing that this is that this is a focus and that this is a goal of the national regulation. So essentially, its main importance was not only in providing a little bit more detailed regulation than what we had before, but particularly to showing that this additional regulation and this seeking for additional regulation doesn't mean that the country is trying to impede or suppress the development of the technology here by adding the additional regulation and criteria to it, but mostly that it is regulating with the goal of fomenting it. So it is regulating with the goal that this has a clear path to be used, or a clearer path to be used on a federal and national level. And also on the federal level, we've had a very recent, just a couple of months ago, reform here in Brazil from the sanitation framework was established. that although it does not deal directly with the topic of waste to energy, it does bring forth an opportunity that is the extended but is still limited the deadline for open dumps to be extinguished in Brazil. That is also by 2024. So we have the deadline that all that open dumps in the setting that we have in the 4.5% of them being a final disposal of waste, as we mentioned before, being extinguished here. And this is on its face, it could seem that it is just something that will boost and foment sanitary landfills because they are the natural substitutes for open dumps. But when you have the system in which sanitary and environmentally proper landfills are more expensive and demand more resources than the current open dumps, you also need to address again the topic of land use and how much land and how much landfills are necessary to continue in the model that we have now, to continue providing for the 79 million tons of waste that we're generating per year. And reducing that volume and reducing the amount that goes to landfills becomes important in the setting, exactly because of financial reasons for land use and for continuing the substitution from open dumps. In a private and public interaction and intertwinement of policies, we've had this Brazilian front for the energetic recovery of waste being created by cement and waste management associations, and them having celebrated a cooperation agreement with the Ministry for the Environment, also for the funding of this, for the studying and more for the regulation and fomenting of this technology, showing that there is in the private sector as well as in the public sector this idea and this realization that it is something to be thought of and understood and further developed. Lastly, I quoted these regulations that are a little bit older. They are from 2002 and 1999. The first one addresses particularly the thermal recovery from waste, and the second one, the use of waste in cement plants as an alternative fuel. This is just to show that we have had and we have experiences, particularly in the cement industry, for the use of this technology, and we have technical regulations that are still in place and that are regulating the particular topics of emissions and the particular topics of safety surrounding the matters. But the more recent regulations has the public policy focus that I mentioned at first, while also being based on this prior resolutions and on this prior guidelines that we have from a technical perspective. These are being naturally revised and revisited through the newer regulations, but they are still in place and we still have had these for a while now. The state of Sao Paulo has also had additional regulations also just a couple of months ago. In the end of August, we had a new resolution from the Environmental Secretariat related to fuel derived from waste, so both regulating its production as well as its use in different plants. Also within the same setting, that more regulation here is actually a positive sign that this is being given a focus and it's being seeking to provide a more stable and a more safe setting in terms of regulation, in terms of legal perspectives here in the country. And within this comparison to regulation and how it refers to particular concrete cases and applications, we can also get a lesson here in Sao Paulo from a previous resolution that was from 2009 and has a very similar content to the interministries ordinance that I mentioned before. And we have what is in project and has construction planned for beginning next year. We have the first actual considered actual plant of waste to energy here in Brazil, being in the municipality here in Sao Paulo, that had its first environmental license, or its prior environmental license, issued in 2012. And considering the extensive environmental studies that are required for you to obtain this license here, it goes to show that this regulation from 2009 and this initial project and this initial project that is being discussed and that is planned and already having construction occurred here actually started taking place very shortly after the first resolution was enacted. So that there is also a capability of this resolution turning into establishing a safer setting and giving prospective investors and prospective operators a safer setting in terms of legal grounds. So the financial setting, but still related to the regulatory environment that we have here, we have seen a lot being discussed, and we've had specific indications from the Ministry of Energy in Brazil that there will be public energy auctions for the sector expected for next year already. And this comes from also the third point in the slide, that is coming from the Inter-Ministries Committee on Solid Waste, which is seeking to establish a proposal specifically for energy recovery of urban solid waste through public and private partnerships. And this is directly linked to these public energy auctions that are set to be addressed, to be issued next year. We have an assessment from the Brazilian front on the topic that I mentioned before, that we will need 15 billion reais of investments foreseen by 2030 for these different technologies of waste recovery in Brazil. Also giving further light to what is the potential of the market here at this time. And we have a very interesting interaction with a tool that has been mostly used now and it's in growing use in Brazil, that are the green bonds or the climate bonds. And we have this quote here from the Climate Bonds Initiative State of the Market report from 2017, which is the latest one available, stating that Brazilian labeled green bonds has now reached $3.65 billion. And out of this, you can see that 42% are for clean energy products and 8% for waste and pollution-related matters. So it's still also a possible investment route that it's being continuously and further used and developed here in the country as well in terms of the financial possibilities and financial sector. So all of this does not mean that we don't face obstacles or that we still don't have a lot of background that is against the setting. So having just addressed the financial aspects to it, we need to see also the flip side of the coin of that. That is, when you compare it to, seeing as it is something that is constantly compared to, even in a most improper or misconcepted way, that is compared to landfill's costs, you see that it seems to be in a disadvantage in terms of being seen as something more in the long term, and the benefits and additional external costs that it doesn't have when compared to landfills. It has a more simplistic approach sometimes in seeing that it is just seen as too expensive and not seen in the long run and in the long term as it should be seen. This is something that is an obstacle here for its new implementation and more emphatic implementation currently. And very much relevant is the public perception on the topic. So we have still the setting, still many people within the environmental area, within environmental law discussions, seeing as a source of emissions that is labeling it essentially as toxic emissions coming from that will pollute the air, that will pollute the community surrounding it, and that comparing it to technologies that date back 20 to 30 years ago that didn't have any treatment and that didn't have just labeling essentially as we're burning waste and issuing and putting toxic material in the air. So that is a very misconceived perception that is still present in debates, surprisingly still present in debates, despite what we talk here about for newer technologies. And what is also seen as an impediment for Brazil is its lack of experience with such technology. So we don't see this as we don't have a strong background in going to partially implement this on a step-by-step basis. We see it as something that is very new and we don't have the particular experience with at this time. And this is put forward by several people as being an impediment to it. Oh, this is something that can work for other countries, but for us, we don't have experience with that. So it doesn't see it as the need for gaining experience, or it doesn't see the need for maybe learning from other countries, but it's seen as an impediment from this public perception sometimes. And one that is very much in discussion is that it has, it's been seen as having an apparent competition with recycling. So here there is the public perception, particularly from people involved in the very much needed boost that we need to give the country for recycling rates. So involved in the process of raising recycling rates for all waste types in Brazil. This would be seen and is sometimes put forward as something that would compete with it and actually be a way of reducing recycling in the country. So facing these obstacles and looking at these perspectives, how can we see Japan's experience as something that can assist? And we have Japan as a long-term social and economic partner of the country, so we have that fortunate that the countries have this historical proximity for investments and also for a social goodness. So we have here in Brazil the largest Japanese community outside of Japan, so the countries have this historical proximity both in social and economic terms. And we see Japan as having this extensive and highly regarded experience with waste to energy plants that we could definitely take a lot of lessons from and would be incredibly assistant in the moment that we're going through. So as it has already been doing for Asian countries, we still have this incipient Brazilian setting that can greatly contribute from the application of the Japanese well-development experience in the field. And so just very simply and very briefly seeing how this on a not very profound way, we can already see in Japan's experience, see that dealing with the issues and the obstacles that we have here in Brazil. We can see this extracts that I obtained from Japan's Ministry of the Environment report on solid waste management and recycling. And quoting here, we see that, for instance, with Japan's high-tech incineration facilities, waste incineration has won trust as safe and sound technologies, and when planning construction of such facilities, communication with the surrounding residents about risks is smooth, enabling swift progress in plans to construct incineration facilities in urban and residential areas. And this next picture is something that here, if we were to present it now as an option in Brazil, would actually be seen as something egregious. And we have this location of a waste-to-energy plant, as it is the Shibuya incineration plant, located in the midst of a very populated and residential area, and something that is still seen here in Brazil as being potentially problematic in the country. So definitely something that we can see and compare to. And on this same sense, a few quotes are having, in the Japanese experience, compliance with strict anti-pollution policies, of having high efficiency power generation, which is something that we sometimes also address here, as if you were comparing not only seeing it waste to energy as a global way of addressing the three concerns that we mentioned, so seeing it combined with waste management and energy production, but sometimes it is seen and looked at exclusively from its energy efficiency point without taking other factors into consideration. And in a more general setting, seeing that Japan generates 65 million tons of waste yearly, of which it treats 40 million tons thermally and landfill only 2%. When you compare that to the number that we mentioned before in Brazil, we look at it and we have to think this. So does this 40 million out of 65 million actually prevent or inhibit recycling rates in the country? And this article published from the Columbia University brings forth a graphic that I think should be very well recognized and should be publicized here in Brazil, because it shows and it has this analysis based on several countries, and you can see Japan in the second line top down and Brazil in the fourth line bottom up, and comparing how recycling, waste to energy, and landfillings combine to the waste management of these nations. So it's the ladder of sustainable waste management. And what you can see is actually that the more use of landfilling usually and very commonly refers to lesser rates of recycling and composting, which are the items in green, whereas countries with better developed, which have better developed in both areas, are using more waste to energy and less landfilling than the ones that have worse recycling rates. And this is exactly what's commented on by this article that I referred to. That is that in some parts of the world, as in Brazil here, there's a misconception that recycling and waste to energy compete with each other. However, the graph before was based on data compiled in different countries and shows a general pattern that cities and countries strive to increase their recycling and composting rates as much as possible. And as the recycling rate levels off, the most advanced nations increase waste to energy capacity in order to attain zero landfill. So this still has the setting that you need to compare it, you need to have it as an alternative, not competing with recycling. So it is supplemental to recycling. It is only related to waste that is not able to be recycling. So you're not in detriment of the recycling chain in any way, but you are addressing the problem that is generated by an extensive use or an undue extensive use of landfilling. So you're treating disposal through landfilling as the only alternative when it should be seen as a last resort, as it is in terms of the national policy also here in Brazil. So to end this and wrap it up, just what is the main takeaway from all of these considerations? It is that we are currently at a turning point stage in Brazil in terms of regulation and in terms of seeing this as a focus in the country. And in this turning point, we can look to valuable lessons and experience in Japan to confront grossly imposed stigmas, as well as to address what are actual obstacles here. So developing further technology, gaining more experience with the field, and addressing concerns that that could be even valid concerns, but relate to this stigmas that don't go into further and more deeply analyzing the matter. We can look to Japan's lesson and experience, and we can, as much so as that can be implemented here, and as much so as we can bring this to here, this will only be able and will only allow for the boosting and the guidance and the fomenting of the technology here in Brazil. Unfortunately, we have that with a country that is a long-term investment partner here of Brazil. So we're fortunate enough to have this initial already proximity that can bring us these valuable lessons and experience. So I'd like to thank for the opportunity and thank everyone here for watching. And I remain fully available for any questions or doubts that you may have. Again, I did not go into further many details on a few points because due to time restrictions. But I remain fully available for any questions or doubts or additional interest that you may have through the email that I just set out in the final comment.